Whose writing style should you copy? What successful author should you model yourself after? Would it benefit you to copy another successful writer? What are the pros and cons of doing so? Those are the questions we're going to be answering and more, and we're starting right now. The idea of copying another successful author makes sense for someone new starting out. Let's face it, if Stephen King has a certain way of writing and he sells tens of millions of books, and you want to be just like him and you copy his style, wouldn't it make sense to copy him so that way you too can sell millions of books and become as rich as he is? Does this actually work? Is this a good thing to do? The problem is when you copy another successful writer is you create this rift within yourself because you're trying to force yourself to be someone who you're not. Stephen King has his style of writing that he mastered over decades of writing. Dan Brown has his own style. J.K. Rowling has her own style. Ray Bradbury has his style. Whenever you read a Ray Bradbury book, you know it's him. If you read Dan Brown, you know it's him. If you read a Stephen King novel, you know it's Stephen King. In fact, Stephen King tried releasing books under a different name, of Richard Bachman. And when people read Richard's books, they recognized this sounds too familiar. They thought this doesn't sound right. It sounds too much like Stephen King. To a point where someone investigated, and sure enough, they found out that Richard Bachman is in fact Stephen King. This is what happens when you write. All new writers are nervous about being laughed at or being criticized for not writing well. And it's understandable that a new writer would want to copy a successful writer, saying, well, if they're successful and I copy them, then I'll be successful. And from a distance, this sounds logical, but you have to find your own voice within your own time. And the only way to do that is to practice writing. Because if Stephen King tried writing like Dan Brown, it would be awkward. If J.K. Rowling tried writing like Ray Bradbury, it would end up sounding awkward. We see this happening in the music industry as well, where a new artist starting out tries sounding like another successful singer, and it just doesn't work. When Bruce Springsteen started, he wanted to sound like Roy Orbison, and it just didn't work out. In the beginning, his voice, he was trying too hard to sing like Roy Orbison, and it was just awkward. Bruce Springsteen had to find his own voice, and when he did, that is when he became successful. A lot of new singers try modeling themselves after famous groups like the Beatles or Led Zeppelin or Elton John. The problem is that you can't impersonate someone who's already successful. Besides, why would the book publishing industry want another Stephen King? They already have one. Why would they want another Dan Brown when they already have one? The funny thing about being a writer is you don't realize you have a voice until someone tries to mimic you. And then you realize, oh wow, you didn't realize it, but you actually stumbled across your own voice within time. You didn't even realize you had one until someone else tries to copy you. Stephen King has his own unique way of writing. And if you try to force yourself to write like he does, it's going to create a conflict within your mind. Because one half of you is trying to write your own style, and the other half is trying to write the way he does. And what ends up happening is you write a very awkward sounding novel that your average person's going to read, and right away they're going to sense that you were trying too hard to sound like Stephen King. But instead of sounding like him perfectly, you end up sounding like him awkwardly. The best thing that anyone can do is just to keep on practicing their own writing. And eventually you end up finding yourself writing a certain way. And that way is different. A lot of new writers are nervous that their way of writing isn't going to be successful. But every successful novel writer has thought the same thing. When Stephen King released his first book, He probably thought, oh, I don't sound like the great literary writers of the past. He probably tried copying people in the beginning. Even Stephen King admitted that he tried sounding like H.P. Lovecraft in the beginning when he was writing, but he had to stop because he just couldn't force himself to write like someone else. He had to find his own voice, just as you do as a new writer. If you submit a novel that sounds way too much like Dan Brown or Stephen King or J.K. Rowling, you might end up being rejected by the literary agent right away, with them saying to you, you're trying too much to copy someone successful. And all of that hard work you did to writing your novel ends up being rejected right away because the literary agent doesn't want to release a book. The book publishers, they don't want to release a book that's identical to that of Stephen King or Dan Brown and run the risk of being laughed at and being criticized, where the people who read it will start laughing and think, why did the book publishers release this? It's just a ripoff of Stephen King. The book publishers don't want to be laughed at. They don't want to invest all that money into writing a book that's simply going to be rejected. Just like how, as a singer, you don't want to record an entire album that sounds like Elton John to a point where the public just laughs at it and says, you're trying too hard to be someone you're not. So as a writer, it takes time, but you need to find your own voice to be accepted. Now, a lot of new writers might start off when they start practicing trying to write like someone else, just to get the ball rolling so they can actually get something down on paper. This makes sense when you want to start off practicing to copy like a Stephen King style of writing or a J.K. Rowling or Dan Brown. You can copy their style just to get yourself used to writing, coming up with an idea for a story, and then getting it down on paper. But there does come a point when you have to move away from writing like Stephen King and start writing in your own style, your own voice. Even Stephen King's son, he too writes novels, but you can when you read the books, you can see that there is a difference between his style and his father's style. He didn't try to copy his father's style perfectly. If he did, it would have sounded awkward. But he ended up finding his own voice, and his books are just as great and just as successful. What you don't want to do is try writing like someone else, and then failing, and then quitting, because you're trying to force yourself to do something you can't. And then the next thing you know, you end up quitting writing because you can't write like Stephen King. The last thing you want to do is quit writing. But if you ended up sticking with it and working at it, you might end up discovering your own voice. And all of a sudden, the passion for writing comes alive because you're no longer trying to force yourself to write like someone else. You have the freedom to write as you do. Ask any writer who tried copying someone else. They will tell you that is when they feel the most frustrated because that's when they're forcing themselves to write in a way that's not comfortable for them. It's like wearing somebody else's clothes. If they don't fit, you're not going to feel comfortable. But imagine if you're wearing a suit that's tailor-made. All of a sudden, that suit fits perfectly on you. And it's the same way with finding your own voice. When you find your own voice, all of a sudden, it just feels right. You don't feel that stress anymore of trying to sound like Dan Brown or Stephen King. When you write in your own voice, all of a sudden you feel alive, and now the freedom to just sit down and start writing away. Now all of a sudden you can find yourself finishing your novel. You can find yourself writing at a very fast pace. Because when you do sit down and try to write like someone else, it takes a long time. You get frustrated, you get angry, and you want to stop. But when you do find your own voice, which does take time, that is when you find the freedom to just keep on writing with this smile on your face, with your body feeling relaxed. And the next thing you know, your book is finished. You send it to a literary agent and they love it because it's new, it's different. It doesn't sound like someone who's already out there. It's now your own unique voice. And the next thing you know, one day when your book's published, a new writer's going to come up to you and say, I wish I could write the way you do. And that's going to blow you away. Because there you were trying to write like Stephen King and failing. But then you found your own voice and you found your freedom. And the next thing you know, people are coming up to you saying they love your writing style. They wish they could write like you. And that's really going to make your head shake because you questioned your own writing style at the beginning. You weren't sure if your voice was unique enough to be successful. But now you have people coming up to you telling you that they want to be just like you. Now that's something you want to aim for. Do you keep in mind that there is this myth that you have to be born a successful, amazing writer, or you shouldn't bother? The fact of the matter is, everybody has to learn. Everybody has to practice. Some of the greatest writers of all time were rejected when they wrote their first novels. Even Stephen King was rejected about 3 or 4 times before he eventually published Carrie. And Dan Brown was rejected. J.K. Rowling was rejected a lot with Harry Potter. So it takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of rejection. But this idea that you have to be born great is a myth. Great writers have a passion to not quit. That is what keeps them going. You have to fight every day to be a better writer that you can be from yesterday. And if you believe that you have to be born great and you question if you are one of those people, then you're going to give up way too quickly. And you shouldn't do that to yourself. All great writers need to practice. All great writers get rejected. And if you get rejected, well, you're just like Stephen King. He got rejected at first, but he didn't quit. He stuck with it, and he eventually got his book published, just like you can. There's a million ways to write a book, but not just one. Every writer has their own way of writing. Some write at night, some write during the day, some can write in a crowded coffee shop, others need to be alone. There's a million different ways of writing. So don't think that you have to copy a successful writer's way of how they write and the voice they use, thinking you have to do that. Everybody is different. Everybody is unique. When you find your style, that is when you're going to find your happiness. And that's going to lead to a book being published. If you enjoyed watching this video, be sure to check out my website, where I have a million different blogs that will help you become the greatest writer you can be. In fact, I'm going to leave a link to my website in the description down below. So that way you can visit my site and become the greatest writer you can be as fast as possible. And be sure to check out my next video on how to edit your book after you have finished writing your first draft. In fact, I'm going to leave a link to that video right here, and you can click on that video right now and start watching.